But somebody has to speak out for them because their message is very important, and they are screaming a warning to America and to Canada. To everybody who loves freedom, they are screaming a warning that if you look at what's happening to me and you do nothing, you're next.
I am a husband, a father, a lawyer, a Christian, and a proud Canadian. I started this series because it was clear that our nation needs truth. Not just another biased narrative, but real information of substance. We need access to facts and the freedom to think for ourselves. I'm Leighton Grey, and this is Grey Matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grey Matter. Well, today we have a very important show on a topic that is of concern, should be of concern to many Canadians and also to many Americans. Many people during the 1950s and 60s had to experience the sort of communist arrogance of having the moral high ground. And during that Cold War period, people like Khrushchev and others talked about capitalist decadence, the decadence of the West. Well, the truth of that was exploded in 1973 when a man named Alexander Solzhenitsyn published a series of books in 3 volumes called the Gulag Archipelago. And what we discovered, to our horror, but perhaps not to our surprise, was that throughout the Soviet period, especially during the Stalinist period, that in fact the Soviets were engaged in a systematic persecution of political dissidents. And once that was revealed, of course, that started a conversation in the West about such things. But what's been happening more recently is we're discovering that these Soviet tactics have made their way to the West. And so our guest today is Tim Rivers, and he's involved with a group that has produced a really, really incredible new book about some men in the United States who are being persecuted in this way because of the January 6th incident. So thanks very much for being with us today, Tim. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Leighton. I appreciate you having me on. This is a strange time for both of our countries, I think, really, America and Canada.
Yeah, it really is. We're going to talk about that and the importance of it and the importance of the work that your group is doing and this book, and also another book, a follow-up book that's coming out in December. Yes. Before we go there and dive in, we're going to talk about our framing aphorisms, which is a feature of our show. The first one is from Nelson Mandela, the late Nelson Mandela, who said, "It is said that no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones." Next one is from Russian author, 19th century author Fyodor Dostoevsky, who wrote that the best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in prison. Yeah. Next, from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who we mentioned off the top of the show, who wrote, "A society based on the letter of the law and never reaching any higher fails to take advantage of the full range of human possibilities. The letter of the law is too cold and formal to have a beneficial influence on society. Whenever the tissue of life is woven of legalistic relationships, this creates an atmosphere of spiritual mediocrity that paralyzes man's noblest impulses." And finally, from the best book of all, Hebrews, "Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering." Okay, so who do we have on the show today? Tim Rivers. Tim is a native of Florida. He's a retired IT engineer and writer. With an early background in television and broadcasting, he found a joy in writing for its own sake, which is exemplified in this book that we're going to talk about. Whether it was fictional or technical works, Tim and his wife, Terry, live in the beauty of the Florida nature coast and enjoy exploring its natural wonders. And today he provides a voice to the silence through his Telegram channel, the American Gulag Chronicles, which is also the name of the book we're going to talk about. And he speaks out for equal justice and liberty in America. The book is called the American Gulag Chronicles. And this is what we're going to talk about today. But perhaps before we dive into the book, Tim, I wonder whether you wouldn't mind providing our viewers and listeners with a basic summary of the January 6th situation, what actually happened, and also the agenda that is being fought in the United States.
It's amazing because our both of our countries have elections, right? And elections are very important. We've heard over and over again, elections have consequences. And the 2020 election had consequences. I think many people doubted its veracity. Many people in the United States thought that there were so many things wrong with it that it needed to be invalidated and redone, or at least examined. And that led to basically a large portion of the conservative community coming to Washington, D.C. to hear a number of patriotic speeches, and probably the last time they would hear number 45, President Trump, speak in public as president. And that day was planned both to be, very peaceful rallies and patriotic and political speeches by both uh, pundits as well as celebrities, congressmen, representatives, and of course the president. And that's what happened that day. Some people think it was over 1 million people, but I've seen the pictures, and it filled the mall from end to end, and completely filled the front of the Capitol building, and was still spilling out of the area near the White
Oh,
House. This was an incredible
that's
throng of people,
remarkable. Yeah.
probably biggest throng of people that had really ever showed up for a political reason. And so I can imagine, I've been, as a young man, been in concerts where you were so shoulder to shoulder with people. The crowd moves left, you move left with the crowd, move right. So when you get a crowd that big and everything is in momentum, many people just were swept along with it. Um, and mostly, for the most part, even though they were concerned as the news came out that they basically, there were challenges to the election being properly raised by constitutional grounds. And yet there seemed to be some turbulence about whether or not it was going to go forwards. Somewhere along that line, the video showed that the police simply opened up on the crowd. They
Right.
they fired tear gas. They shot pepper spray. They fired exploding munitions into clusters of people who, as I mentioned, could not move. They were basically trapped in place, and that resulted in injuries. And basically, we're talking. I've had testimonies. If you go to my website at j6patriotnews.com, listen to the interviews of these people who were there that day. Some of them were basically in prayer circles with their heads bowed and praying. Some
Yeah.
were singing, and they were basically police just reached across the line and started bludgeoning them with batons and
And
spraying them with
and
pepper spray.
one woman died, didn't she, Tim?
Two people
As a
died
result,
that
yes.
day.
So, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
well, the one most known that everybody hears about is Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt was an Air
Right.
Force veteran, an unarmed female who was basically climbing through a window and was basically shot down without
Right.
provocation. In most cases, that would be either murder or manslaughter. In this case, the individual got a congressional medal. Out in the
Incredible.
crowd, in the tunnel where all of this compression was taking place, a phalanx of police officers basically tried to push the crowd back and trap them inside about a 10-foot space. And people were literally being knocked over and trampled by the crowd. Again, imagine this press of people that nobody can move. And it's pressing forward, and the police are pressing backwards, and people were falling down and being trampled to death. At the same time, they were being repeatedly pepper gel sprayed, beaten with batons, tear gas. The videos are out there. Again, for a long time, we've all said, "Show us the video, show us the video." Now you can see the videos. They're coming out. There's many places where you can look at them. Again, front page of my website, j6patriotnews.com.
Hmm.
Many locations where you can go look and make your decisions for yourself. But it appeared that day that the police instigated a riot. It was a police incited riot, which really got out of control.
Right.
Two other people in the crowd died after being hit with those exploding munitions. They had heart attacks and could not get proper care in the middle, and they also expired. So 4 people in total died that day, and none of them were police officers. I really want to make
Yeah.
sure that all of our Canadian audiences
Yeah.
understand that, because mainstream media has told a different story. But the
Yes.
only 4 people who
Yes.
died that day were protesters, and two of
Yeah.
them appear to have been murdered.
Incredible. Isn't it true, also, Tim, that there were members of Antifa that were planted in the crowd to try and stir them up and try to get them to advance on the Capitol? Or am I getting ahead of the narrative?
No, you're not, and we're hearing more and more of it. Now we do have videos of Antifa members basically taking off their black bloc uniforms and putting on MAGA hats, and also doing the reverse after incidences
Right.
violence that took place.
Yeah.
So basically,
Yeah.
going from one uniform to the other in order to disguise themselves. And I
Yeah.
recently had an incredible interview with the J6er who just got out of jail or got off of his sentence of I believe it was 7 months, who tells a story of being escorted out of the congressional tunnels after being arrested. And this was like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, long after most of the protesters were broken up and gone and the guard had responded and things were back to normal. As they were being escorted out through the tunnel, there were a number of J6ers, including Victoria White and this individual, and 3 BLM activists who had been brought in beat to a pulp and covered in pepper spray. They had obviously been in heavy altercation with the police. They were contused and bruised. They are
Right.
covered in spray. Nobody wanted to get near them because they were so badly coated. And as they were walking through this tunnel, Stacy looks down and he sees down the length of the tunnel is covered in black bloc clothing with BLM logos and Antifa logos and face masks
Really.
and just the whole length of the tunnel. Now, remember that this is a restricted congressional zone and there are cameras up and down the length of this tunnel. And so,
Right.
my question is when you ask about was Antifa and BLM in there, well, it looks to me like if they used those tunnels, they were inside the Capitol, not outside the
Yeah.
Capitol.
We've even heard about, there's been some video showing that certain people were actually allowed into the premises and given tours, and that later on they were charged and processed as as terrorists. And then there was also a recent story about one man who was not even there, but he received a sentence. It was like a life sentence, I believe, of 22 years. He was not even there. He was charged and convicted of essentially of conspiracy related to the January 6th event. So really, a lot of really strange things going on surrounding this January 6th event, and really in violation of the rule of law. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, it is. It's absolutely constitutionally violations of not only your First and Fourth and Fifth Amendments, the way some of these people were arrested, and we'll get to that because
Yeah.
it's very horrific the way the federal authorities decided to treat these people as if they were ISIS. Um,
Right.
and I guess really what we're concerned about the most is the overreach of authority in America has gone beyond what most of us can understand.
Right.
It is a powerful political narrative that is playing out within our justice system, which is supposed to be isolated and insular from that type of
Yes.
influence.
Hmm.
We in America we have a three-pointed system. We have our
Right.
Congress, we have our judiciary, we have our executives, and they're supposed to
Mhm.
balance, to check and balance each other, and not allow one or two to seize control of the system. But in
Right.
this case, that appears to be what's happened. And the outcome is exactly as our founding fathers of America warned us it would be. It is rapid and brutal tyranny. And these gentlemen and ladies of J6, and right now I'm very close to 1,200 arrested, and they're not stopping.
That many,
Here,
1,200.
here,
Wow.
2.5 years past the event, and the FBI is still rounding people up for basically walking around outside the Capitol.
Yeah. And these are mothers, fathers,
Grandmother.
military veterans, grandmothers, people, just everyday people from all walks of life who are just being rounded up and arrested. It's almost like a witch hunt. But I want to go
Oh,
back,
it is.
Tim. One of the questions that I wonder about in watching the whole January 6th situation unfold is, how did people end up inside the Capitol building? How did that unfold?
Most of them, for the most part, were invited in.
Right.
You again, we can talk about this and tell people what we've heard and what we've seen and what we've read because that's our job as journalists is to try and relate this. But the
Right.
reality of it is, there's nothing more telling than somebody relating it to you in the first person, to tell you what happened to them as they saw it, as they experienced it, and what's happening to them right at the moment. And that's what
Yeah.
these interviews do. I can't really stress how powerful they are in relating
Yeah.
truth versus you hearing what you've heard from the narrative, from
Yeah.
mainstream press, from people like CNN or Fox or even the federal government's January 6th Unselect Committee, who
Right.
produced this Hollywood style report that was absolutely had nothing to do with the truth.
Yeah.
It was as doctored as a Bruce Willis film.
Right.
And so I guess that is our dilemma in America. And when we look at what happened, by the way, we were all very strident supporters of the convoy, and we actually tried to get
Yes.
our own convoy started in
That's it. I
America.
remember.
As you know,
Yeah.
what is it? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. And I still communicate with people from within that convoy group in Canada. And
Really?
I understand the persecutions that they're undergoing.
Yeah.
I understand the persecutions that vaccine deniers and COVID fighters are
Yeah.
undergoing. I understand
Yeah.
the problems that religious institutions and priests and ministers are undergoing. This
Mhm.
is a world move towards a cultural that is devoid of religion, devoid of
Mhm.
faith, devoid of fidelity to country and to patriotism.
Yeah, and truth, yes. And so you've actually done something about this. You're doing a lot about it. In fact, if you and your group have created this book, the American Gulag Chronicles, and together with Marie Goodwin, who is a J6 mother and activist, you've created the J6 Patriot News, which tells America up to date information about the state and mistreatment of these patriots and how they can help them. And you founded the American Gulag Chronicles and began publishing the letters, art, and stories of America's new political prisoners. And these are shocking stories, aren't they, Tim? I think people would be amazed to learn about this. And the book, I actually, in my research, for example, perhaps you could tell us about some of these amazing people. Maybe we'll start. Could you tell us about Eric Clark?
Well, Eric's a really nice guy. He's a veteran. Let me first of all, point out that that a lot of these individuals are veterans. In America, we have an
Yeah.
active military, but no,
Is
we
that a
haven't.
coincidence? I noticed
No, it's
that.
not.
Yeah.
It's basically when you look at those incarcerated right now, the number of those incarcerated who are veterans exceeds 70 to 80%. But 27% of all of the January 6th defendants at count last year were veterans. That's a huge number,
Yeah.
folks, because only 7% of the U.S. population are active or retired veterans.
Yeah.
So you have a number 4 times the national population of veterans who
Mhm.
arose that day. And many people say, well, why? Why? It's because veterans take an oath to defend and protect the
Mhm.
Constitution of this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Yeah.
And they felt that that maybe was what they needed to do that day to peacefully raise their voice in order to defend this country.
Yeah.
And really, many of us feel it was a very well engineered trap.
And you talk about veterans, not just veterans, but some of these people are really highly decorated people who have fought in multiple theaters of war, been injured in combat. Really, you would think, red-blooded Americans, and the last people that you would ever expect to be put in jail for their political beliefs. And maybe this is something I would think that's one of the things that's maybe so astonishing and really frightening, shocking to Americans, isn't it?
I stand here almost 2.5 years after I left happy retirement, right? I don't know how happy it was, but it was retirement. And I wrote a letter to an individual, just went to patriotmailproject.com, randomly picked a J6er because I had been working with election integrity and I had found
Right.
many things that disturbed me. And I was convinced that these people were being used as pawns. And so
Right.
I just wrote to a random person. And I got a letter back, and this is one of his letters. And you can probably see his name is Jeff McKellop. He says, John
Yep.
Jeff McKellop, political
Yeah.
prisoner.
Yeah.
Jeff is a 22-year retired Green Beret Special Forces veteran, served on at least 5 continents. Is awarded 3 Bronze Stars. In the last 10 years, he's
Wow.
been a State Department protective services person, rescuing
Yeah.
people
So
from.
so basically the living embodiment of John Wayne.
That's it. Absolutely. I call him Lone Wolf McKellop. And Jeff is now sitting in a prison in Fort Worth, where he has been incarcerated either in the D.C. Gulag or in this medical facility for people of questionable mental facility, which Jeff
Right.
is not. Jeff is
Right.
the sharpest guy you're ever going to meet. And he's been there for since March of 2021 and has not seen trial.
Wow.
I want you to think about that.
So you're talking about now about Jeff McKellips, is that right?
Yeah,
And
Jeff was
he's
one of the first people.
yeah,
Jeff is what brought me into the fight, and one of the
yeah,
first people my wife and I adopted. We adopted 3 veterans in the DC Gulag: Jeff McKellop, James
mhm.
McGrew, a Marine, and Barton Shively, another Marine.
So
Um,
was it Jeff McKellips or Kyle Fitzsimmons in the book? There's a picture. You'll know what I'm talking about, entitled "Home Sweet Home," where they actually draw a diagram of the holding facility where they're being held, and it's just amazing to think that people are being held in a facility like this for no other reason that they attended a political protest, and the conditions under which they're being treated are just awful. They really don't conform to the standards of American prisons, do they?
no, they don't. If anything comes out of this, when we pass through this fire, if there's still a Republic of the USA standing, prison reform must be at the top of our congressional action. What
Mm,
has happened by turning the prisons of this country over to private entity, to corporate run money havens, is just, it's abhorrent. And the J6ers have shown a light on that because they're now scattered across America. Again, go to my website, j6patriotnews.com. You'll find a map of the USA with pins on every place that they've incarcerated these people in America's new gulags. And it's a shame, really, because as you read these letters and you see and hear who these people are, you're going to wonder, you know, gee, did I go to church with that guy last week? Is this the fellow
yeah,
that we went fishing with yesterday? Is this the
yeah,
coach of my girls' baseball team? Because that's who these
right.
people are. They're
Hmm.
police officers, they're teachers, they're ministers, they're a cross section of America, and they're being persecuted like many are in Canada today for their
Hmm.
beliefs and their desire for liberty and freedom.
This is what shocked me when looking at the book and going through some of the biographies and the letters that are there, is that and I'm sure this is not by accident. The people who are being arrested and put into these gulags are people who would otherwise be community leaders. There
Yes.
would be otherwise people leading others in peaceful protest, or asking the kind of questions that need to be asked about abuses of government authority, of government overreach. They're the kind of people who are going to organize a peaceful protest, on a Saturday. And that seems to be by design. Would you agree, Tim?
I would, but the government of the United States has tried to vilify these folks by grouping them into what they kind of rename as a militant category.
Right.
We have an organization here in the United States and in Canada. By the way, there's members in Canada all over the place. There's members in Nova Scotia. There's
It's great
members
to
in.
hear.
It's called the Proud Boys, and what are they? They're
Yes.
a
Yes.
fraternity of guys who like to drink and get together on the weekends away from the women and party, and that's it. But they're also, many of them are veterans, and they took on the role of trying to protect MAGA attendees and rally attendees and speakers from the violence that BLM and Antifa were inflicting on them when they showed up to just do a peaceful rally or just have an event
Right.
and
Yeah.
get basically stomped and stoned. And just people
Yeah.
have been shot and stabbed at these rallies by these people. They are a violent leftist wing of the government, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But more so, these people they show up in like a little bit of a military garb. They might have a vest and a helmet. They're there to protect the speaker because the last time they were there, somebody got smacked in the head with a baton. And so they didn't go dressed to overthrow the government. They went dressed to protect the speakers at the rallies that were permitted. By the way, all of these rallies were permitted. And the government now says, well, we revoked the permits. Well, nobody told the millions of people who had showed up to go to those rallies.
Right.
And so now they claim, well, you were trespassing, where those
Right.
permits. So it seems like a big trap. But the folks that the government is trying to single out, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. The Oath Keepers are nothing more, folks, than what I just said. Somebody like myself who raised their hand and swore an oath to defend the country against enemies, foreign and domestic. It's an oath of fealty to your country. Canada's got one too. And,
Yeah.
and when you
Yeah.
take that oath, it doesn't go away, especially if you're a military person. That oath is a lifetime oath. It does not go away. And these people, because they are committed to this, because they're veterans, because this larger group of individuals were the first to stand up and the first to protect the defenseless that day, they're the ones that the government needs to paint as the villains in the fairy tale. You
Hmm.
have to have a bad wolf, or Little Red Riding Hood just doesn't look pathetic.
Right. And
And so,
a lot of these people are also Christians too, aren't they, Tim? I mean, for
very much,
example, there's some beautiful poetry that's provided in the book, and also art. One of these is called "The Gift." I just want to read this one.
yeah.
Offering up my soul to Christ, a baby born into the night. Clothed in my sins no longer suffice. I now stand before Christ, no more scars, pain and worry drift afar. That's just an example, one of the examples of these courageous people, and these letters and the artwork that they're doing. It just gives you an idea of what kind of people are there. Do you think it's coincidental that many of the people who are being held right now are Christians, or do you think that's also by design?
No, that's that. It may not be by design, but it is by affiliation.
Yeah,
Because what do
yeah,
Christians stand for? What do Christians believe in? What is the Judeo-Christian ethic that our country is founded upon? These are important concepts to Americans, and yes, religion has taken a back seat in the last few generations, and perhaps that's a cause of all of this. But many of the people, in fact, I would say almost all of the people that I deal with on a day-to-day basis on this front line of resistance is they're Christians. They are devout Christians. They believe in the power of prayer, but even more so, they believe that God works through man, and
hmm
that action is the antithesis of being on your knees, is to get up and to work. Joshua wasn't on his knees. None of the people, none of the warriors of the Bible were on their knees when they were
right.
doing the work. When evil has to be conquered, that's when you stand. And that's what so many of these people, I feel so privileged at this time of my life to be a senior. I mean, most of us are at this age, we're like, oh, my golf clubs are getting too heavy. To be re energized, to have a purpose, and to meet I can only describe them as true American heroes, people who just stepped out of their ordinary life, out of their comfort zones, have thrown their just like our founding fathers, have thrown their treasure, their possessions, their family, and their sacred honor into this fight to try and save this country. And it is just amazing, to see these people in action. I'm honored, but at the same time, I'm dumbstruck,
Yeah.
that these folks can just rise to this occasion. And we need more people to do that. There is an American spirit, just like there's a Canadian spirit of
Hmm.
freedom, of patriotism, of belief in the real meanings of our country and its people. And we
Hmm.
feel that being eroded here in the U.S., and I think many in Canada do too, in some of the
Right.
provinces. And the only thing that will stop that is people arising to do their duty.
Hmm.
Um, if you shirk duty, then you basically have no action. If you have no action, then there can never be change.
Oh, that's well said. I think one of the reasons why Christians are either targeted or, let's say, are casualties of this conflict is because as Christians we hold ourselves beholden to a power that is higher than the state, and the new state religion of secularism, progressivism, or wokeness, whatever name you want to put on it, they have to replace and supplant the traditional religion, the religion that clearly comes through, for example, in the Declaration of Independence. They have to replace that with this new progressive. They cannot countenance this other religion. They have to stamp it out and wipe it out. And what they're trying to do is actually not original. It's been happened for over 2,000 years. Fortunately, Christianity is 2,000 years and undefeated. And what happens, and what seems to be happening. Correct me if this is wrong, as bad as this is in terms of what's happening to these good people, many of them Christians, it is galvanizing them. It is developing a movement against the sort of tyranny of the state that people like, Joe Biden and the Democrats, and in our country, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are trying to create. Would you agree with that analysis?
But at the same time, I think there is a rising tide. I can't speak for Canada, although I think the convoy is a pretty good example
Yes,
of the
it
rising
is.
tide.
Yeah.
As harshly as a government pushes back against anybody who rises to speak, that should be the giveaway that this is an important topic. That the
Yes.
government cannot book the opposition because they cannot stand the contention.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's the case here in America, that we see this. The conservative right is very religious in nature, and so they base, as you say, they base their authority on a higher cause, a higher mission.
Right.
The left has no god. Their god is government. Their god is
Yes.
big authority. It is a hollow god. It's basically, does not even made of gold, folks. Um, and at the same time, they are as fanatical about their god as Christians can be about theirs. And
Yes.
this is the battle of good and evil, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
antithetical. It's written about over and over again in the Bible and through ancient texts throughout time. And I feel that for us in America, we are being tested.
Right.
Um, book one covered these 35 of these guys' lives from
Hmm.
September of 2021, when they had just begun to get accommodated. I mean, some of them have already been in prison for 5 and 6 months. The claustrophobia of solitary confinement 23-1 was beginning to lessen a little bit, and so people had begun. Patriot Mail Project had cranked up in July, and by August and September, we were exchanging mail with each other.
Hmm.
And the mail that started coming back out, you see this rise of a religious intensity, as we all
Hmm.
see. Where did Christ go for his theophany? He went to the desert in isolation,
Right.
where all of
Yes.
these people have gone and sought solitude so that they could hear the
Hmm.
word of God within them. That's
Yeah.
what's happening to so many of these people. I think the
Hmm.
government wanted to treat them like they were lumps of coal, and we're just going to grind them into
Right.
dust.
Right.
uh, Stupid people, they made diamonds. These guys are resilient, they're patriotic. And in book two, where I pick up their story in September of 2022, and this book will come out in December,
Right.
it's called The Art of Confinement, because they've gone from that period of the roughness of understanding the persecution, or not understanding the persecution, maybe, um, the confusion, the pain, the betrayal, into this phase where they sing the national anthem together to show their fealty to their country despite their government's betrayal. They
Right.
write letters of encouragement to their supporters, for God's sake. I got the guy that I write to, he keeps going, man, I got so much money. You should just take some money for the things that you do for us. We could never do that. But just the heart of these guys who are locked in prison, limited to a small commissary, persecuted, they're underwater, would bankrupt with their legal bills. They can hardly ever find attorneys to represent them, and all they want to do is help their supporters.
Yeah.
Uh, these are angels, and the supporters are angels, and this is all. I mean, I don't know how else to describe them other than
Yeah.
heroes. Um,
It's so remarkable what you say about how, as you say, the sort of the coal being pressured into diamonds. We talked about, Solzhenitsyn and his example. He was actually a hardcore Marxist Leninist. He was a captain in the Russian army,
yep.
and he was in prison simply because he wrote a letter to someone he thought was a friend criticizing Stalin. And this is part of the extreme psychological violence that you talk about. People are put into a situation they never could have imagined they could be placed in, really doing anything, doing things that they never thought would result in imprisonment. And Solzhenitsyn came out at the end of his imprisonment actually a very devout Russian Orthodox Christian. So there certainly is a lot of truth to what you say. I wonder, Tim, if you could talk a little bit about how the people who are imprisoned in the United States are being denied due process. Why can't they get bail? Why are they being denied, and how are they being denied that? Is it because they're regarded by the Department of State and Justice as terrorists? Is that the answer, or why
Yeah,
why can't
a
they
threat
seem to
to
get?
Threat to the public, I think, is the term they like to use. However,
Wow.
these people are anything but threats to the republic.
The guy with the
Uh,
horn hat is a threat to
yeah,
the.
I mean, these are retired Army officers. I've already told you about Green Berets. Jeremy
Yeah.
Brown here in my state is another retired
Yeah.
Green. Jeremy was the poster boy, for God's sakes. If anybody went to a recruiting station, they saw that poster for Green Beret with a guy with the face paint and he's bushing through.
Yeah.
That was Jeremy Brown. He's a 20-year
Wow.
retired Green Beret. He's sitting in Citrus County Prison right now. So
Yeah.
these are really these are times that are difficult for understand. How do we weigh these punishments that we're seeing coming out of DC with
Yeah.
what we consider, personally, I consider the severity of the crime versus our summer of love in 2020 when BLM and Antifa burned almost $300 million worth of cities down,
Hmm.
took over, declared themselves individual states within the city of Oregon and Washington. I mean, this was some crazy behavior, and the government sat and watched it happen and did nothing.
Yeah.
And yet here these people are being persecuted to the nth degree. You mentioned Enrique Torrio, um, 22 years. He's a Proud Boy. Enrique wasn't even in D.C. Um, I actually published the conference call that he held, where they're all saying, "Look, we're just going there. Nobody be drinking, nobody be doing anything weird. No weapons. We're going just to be peaceful that day." I mean, it's all laid out, and yet they still came out with a conspiracy and an insurrection charge and give him 22 years. And now the prosecution comes back and wants to appeal the sentence because they want to give him more.
Incredible.
Yeah,
Wow.
this is incredible. And here's the problem. Ordinary Americans who sit and watch this on television, or who sit and maybe listen to this podcast, or who watch this or maybe read Epoch Times or Gateway Pundit, and they hear these stories and they go, damn, that's a shame. Well, they didn't read Solzhenitsyn, because he
Yeah.
tells you right up front, silence is complicit. If
Yes.
you know about it and you don't do anything about it and you sit there and watch it, you will be next. There's a famous poem called "When They Did Nothing." Are you familiar with it?
Yes. Yes. That's Reinhold Muller, I believe, is the.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Jeremy
Brilliant.
Brown rewrites it at the end of book one. Jeremy Brown rewrites it and says, "When they did something."
Yeah.
Um, and that is the story of January 6th. This is the day that they did something, when they executed their constitutional rights to ask redress from their Congress, that they did not believe that the election had gone the way. They could not understand the mechanics of it, or the numbers, or the
Hmm.
rapid changes in the numbers, and the ascendancy of the leader in the system. And I think that all of those things were earnest reasons to be there that day, were legal reasons to be that day, were dutiful reasons to be there that day as American
Right.
citizens.
Yeah.
And so that is the dichotomy that we're faced with, is like, we did the right thing and we're being punished for
Right.
it.
And it's not just unique to the United States. For the benefit of the people viewing this in the U.S. and also for Canadian viewers, right now we have two of the leaders of the Freedom Convoy, Tamara Leach,
Yeah.
and others who are in Ottawa right now, and Chris Barber, who are going through what's turning out to be a show trial. And the case is falling apart. That trial has now lasted longer than the Freedom Convoy itself. But Tamara Leach spent considerable time in remand in jail, pre-trial, and we have four men in Coutts, Alberta, who were involved in a protest that was around the same time as the Freedom Convoy, and they're much like the January 6th people that we're talking about, in that they have been remanded without bail since the early part of 2022 for nearly 2 years, and they're essentially fighting to get due process, but they're being treated essentially as political prisoners. And so the weaponization of the state to
Yeah.
suppress dissidents is not something that is unique to the U.S. It's happening throughout the West, and it's something that, for those of us who remember a different time, it's very shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've given it a word here in the U.S. We call it lawfare.
Yeah,
It's a subversion of the function of justice in order to persecute and to dethrone your political opponents, and
yeah,
that is something that is certainly contrary to the concepts of our founding fathers and our Constitution. I think it's antithetical to most Americans' belief in the way things should work here, and there's there's a very big question about the competency of our leadership right now.
Yes. Yes.
Even our Congress appears to be just
Mhm.
constantly in internecine strife. They can't seem to get it together. They can't seem to figure out how to spend money.
Yeah.
Listen, folks, when my bank account says zero, I got to wait till the next Social Security
Yeah.
check. I
It's
don't
the
get a
exact same in
continuing
Canada.
resolution.
Yeah.
I don't go
Exact
to the
same in
grocery
Canada.
store and go, hey, I'm just going to sign this document. You just give me what I want. That's not how it works. And so why should government not be have to rule by those same rules?
It seems pretty clear to anyone paying attention that these leaders, as you describe them, are all reading out of the same playbook. Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden uh, basically brand these people who are peaceful protesters as terrorists. So, and they make someone who is a dissident who disagrees with what the state is doing, but is, just exercising their civil liberty to exercise peaceful protest against the government. That now is synonymous with terrorist, and this is permitting them to imprison people arbitrarily and deny them due process. And so, really, your poem you were describing about Nazi Germany, is very, very appropriate here. And people should understand, no one's safe in a state that operates in this way. No one is safe. And so we all need to really get involved and support these people who are in prison, don't we?
We do. Do you remember Benjamin Franklin once said that those who would trade freedom
Yes.
for safety deserve neither?
Yes.
And that's what we did here in the United States. I'm just going to be very frank about it. I'm an American. I'm a senior citizen. I have permission to be honorary and to speak my mind according to my
Certainly
Constitution.
on this show. That's why we brought you on.
and my opinion is that the United States has gone through a crisis of internal culture, and that
Yeah.
we see this willingness of the after we were attacked on 9/11, the
Hmm.
nation went into kind of a shock state where
Yeah.
almost like you were in an auto accident and you're stumbling around outside the vehicle and there's glass everywhere. You have no idea where you are or what happened until an EMT comes up and grabs you and tries to get you on a stretcher. You're just in a state of shock. And so almost anybody who would run up to help you would be acceptable. And there came the Patriot Act in
Yeah.
America. And that Patriot Act opened the door for everything that you're seeing happening to these people today. And
Hmm.
in many cases, we're not going to go deeply conspiratorial, but in America, we call this worldwide conspiracy that we see in the coordination of leaders of countries that seem to be moving in this direction. New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain, Canada. We see this domino falling effect of
Hmm.
leaders who seem to be following an agenda that is not of ours. It's a big club, and folks, you and I aren't in it. Uh,
Yeah.
and and therein we call it the deep state in America. You know that there's
Right.
this insidious worldwide force that is led by oligarchs
Yeah.
and the few moguls of media who want to see the world be a very different and controlled place than it is today,
Hmm. Hmm.
and feel that humans are should be countable elements and not
Right.
individuals.
Yeah.
And so that's what we battle. That's what you're battling with Trudeau. That's what we're battling with Biden, with Harris, with all these corrupted members of Congress who have been purchased by lobbyists in foreign countries. We in America are deeply ashamed. I am deeply ashamed of the corruption that I see at the executive and the congressional branches of our government. It is a stain that must be cleaned,
Mm.
whatever it takes to clean that stain from our country, because without it, people do not respect it. If you do not respect the authority of government, and you basically the government doesn't respect the authority and the power of citizens, you no longer have a contract as a country.
Yeah.
You simply have borders, and a lot of
Yeah.
barbed wire.
Tim, I'd like to get your take on something else that just happened recently. And that is with what's happened over on October 7th in the Gaza Strip in Israel, there's been the rise of Palestinian protesters that have engaged in protests very similar to January 6th. In fact, I saw a video of some Palestinian protesters even getting inside the gates and approaching the White House, and also going and doing sit-ins at in the offices of congressmen and senators.
Yep.
And yet they're being treated very, very differently than the January 6th protesters, aren't they? What's your take on that?
Well, I'd like. Who knows what kind of jail I'll end up for telling you what I think about that. But the reality is, I do feel that this is a one-sided system of government now. They have an agenda that is being fulfilled. BLM and Antifa don't realize it, but they are the pawns. They're the ones being
Right.
manipulated. Do you
Yeah.
think that when all of this is over, that there will not be a demand for just retribution?
Yeah.
Certainly, there will be, and yeah, I don't know where that will lead. I would hate to think that America could ever degrade to a civil war, but my concern is that no matter who wins the 2024 election, the other side will lose their minds.
Hmm.
And this infectious disease of rampage. I don't know what other word could you call it? It's rampage.
Right.
Um, because you don't get your political way.
Yeah.
The left is really violent. The right is not. Yet we're the ones that are called racist. We're the ones that are called insurrectionists. We're the ones that are called terrorists. And yet it's the left that does all the damage. And so nobody can look at that and say, yeah, this system of justice is equal and fair. This government is equal and fair. This in America, we have lost our balance.
Hmm. Hmm.
And these guys in these letters are just pleading with their supporters and pleading with America. And I just want to stop for a second. When I started getting these letters, they were kind of like this one I got, which says, "Dear Tim, dear Mr. Rivers, dear Mr. and Mrs. Rivers." That's how they were. When they started coming back, that's how they were addressed.
Right.
And then I started publishing these letters, and these guys with the feedback, prisons have their own grapevine as well. And the feedback is, "Oh my God, our letter! Somebody read your letter, Joe. They read it on the air the other day." And these guys begin to realize that their messages were reaching America beyond just the individual that they were writing back
Right.
to. And the letters changed. They went, "Dear America, dear American patriots, dear Patriot family." So what had happened is this wasn't my mail anymore, even though it was coming to my address, and it was a response to something that I had sent out into the world. It wasn't my mail. It,
Right.
it was now meant for America, and
Hmm.
and that's why we started publishing these. But as we published them, other people started sending us their letters as well. And we just started getting floods of letters that people had gotten back from these prisoners from all across the country. And they got so numerous that the person I started J6 News with, Marie Goodwin, just said, you have to do something more with these letters and just throw them into the echo chamber.
That was the
Yeah,
genesis of the book then, yeah.
that's how the book got started.
And you also published them on a podcast. You have the Political Prisoner podcast, right, Tim?
Yeah, we have a number. I mean, and now we do it all over the place. I
Yeah.
do a Freedom Friday on Lindell TV, #2, every Friday at noon, CST. Basically, we have tried to become the loudspeaker, the
Right.
megaphone for these guys, because they are silenced. They are just for speaking out. They're punished and they're restricted, and they have their rights taken away and their phone privileges denied. Their mail blocked, and but somebody has to speak out for them because their message is very important, and they are screaming a warning to America. And to Canada. To
Yes.
everybody who loves freedom, they are screaming a warning that if you look at what's happening to me and you do nothing, you're next.
Right.
You are next. Um, when I interviewed Enrique 2 days after his sentence, he said, "You want to know who I'm meeting in these holding cells as I'm waiting to be moved to a BOP facility? I'm meeting people who were working in the election system, who basically are protesting the election. They're in here waiting to go to prison. I'm
Wow.
meeting people who stood outside abortion clinics and protested. They're waiting to go to prison.
Mm.
I'm meeting ministers who were basically arrested for holding church services during COVID, and they're going to
Yeah.
prison.
We had
And
those in Canada.
this is,
Yeah.
yeah. Are you? And see, we don't hear this on MSM. You will
Yeah.
not. MSNBC will not tell you this. Neither will CNN. I'm not sure what the news services are in Canada. Maybe Reuters. You're not going to hear that there, folks. The only place
Yeah.
that this information is coming out is within the conservative media, which
Right.
is deeply, deeply shadow banned and covered over. And so that's where shows like yours are so important. If you reach 10 people, that audience is smarter than the way you left them, more informed and less liable to fall for the
Yeah.
lies that the
Mhm.
mainstream moguls want to
And
put out.
also encouraged. encouraged.
Absolutely.
We're giving hope, right? That's a big part of what you're doing through your project, and you're giving more than hope, though. You're actually raising a lot of money to help these people, aren't you? I mean, that's something we should mention. It's a beautiful book, but all the work that you're doing is aimed at raising money to support these brave people who are imprisoned and their families. Correct?
That's correct. I signed the rights of the book over to a nonprofit I created called the American Gulag Chronicles. Book one, by the way, is called Letters from Prison.
Right.
Book one
Yeah.
is American Gulag Chronicles, Letters from Prison, and you can find it at a really simple place, lettersfromprison.us.
Okay.
And it gets you to the book. And all the proceeds from the book, 100% of the proceeds after print and ship, go to support these men and their families through this. Um, we don't think too much about the families when you read the news or you're talking about a J6er, but the reality is they are wounded more deeply than the prisoners. Their breadwinner,
Yeah.
their head of
Yeah.
household. The takedowns have left children and with spouses with PTSD unable to
Mhm.
sleep at night. People have lost their homes and their houses and have their children living with relatives. The horror stories of the persecution that is spread as collateral damages to the families and friends and even associates. I just interviewed Captain Gabe last week in Miami after I attended a Mar-a-Lago event, and he related to me a bioterrorism attack on his business because he was a J6er. And when the FBI came down after Hazmat had sealed off blocks, collected the white powder, put everybody through quarantine, they go, well, why would anybody do this to you? And he says, well, sir, I'm a J6 defendant. The FBI packed up and left and didn't look any further. That's a
Incredible.
bioterrorism attack in downtown Miami, in U.S. soil, and we're not going to investigate it because
Yeah.
you don't really think well of our government. So
Wow.
these are the
Hard to
things
imagine.
that are just outside the ken of most people's belief structure.
Hmm.
If you didn't hear these people tell it to them themselves, if you didn't read it in their letters, if you didn't have the authenticity of hearing it directly from them, you wouldn't believe it because
Right.
it's you can't make it up. It's just
Yeah.
that crazy.
So the book that you mentioned, the first one, it's a beautiful book, by the way, the American Gulag Chronicles, Letters from Prison. It's a collection of prisoners' dispatches, as we've been hearing, over the past nearly 2 years as pretrial defendants from squalid, inexplicably cruel conditions in jails across the United States that will leave a hard forgotten scar on that nation's conscience for many years. So the book is a chronicle of those represent the bellwether for the storm, for conservative dominance, a group of people who are being imprisoned and persecuted for a cause they believe in by a government that views them as enemies of the state. And so this book is their story in their own words, written by their own hands. So that's the first book. The second book that's coming out in December uh, is takes this now a step further and deals with what's happened since their imprisonment and how they're fighting this fight. Is that correct?
Yeah, the first book covers, as I said, September 2021. These many people had already been in there 3 to 6 months, and takes it through one full year into September 2022. The second book picks up where that leaves off, but I think you'll find that the tone of the first book and the letters is a little more militant because there is a just anger, a resentment, a
Right.
feeling of betrayal, right, that
Mhm.
comes through in their letters and even comes through in my introduction because when I started this after reading that first letter I told you about from Jeff McKellop, I was literally in a fugue state for a day or two. I just could not believe that you would treat an American hero this way because I worked through most of my career with IBM. I worked with military and special forces. And I have a
Okay.
deep respect for them. Um, but then I couldn't believe that you would do this to any American, not just I mean, gosh, a war hero, forget it, but to just any American for upholding their rights, unconstitutional right to assemble and to seek redress. These things just completely changed my persona into somebody called
Mhm.
Furious Tim,
Yeah.
and that comes through in these letters and in my introduction. But in book two, we've moved into another phase. We've moved into trials, sentences, even some people having served their sentence and now trying to return to a normalcy of life and finding everything stacked against them.
Right.
Um, the second book is more spiritual.
Mm.
That's what comes through. There's still amazing art, stories, poems. Um,
Yeah.
it's still mind-boggling. In fact, I think the art in book 2 is even superior to the art in book
Well,
1.
the first book is beautiful to look at. It's very colorful and wonderful poetry, and I think people will really enjoy it just on that level. Of course, it's got a tremendous, unique human story to tell as well. So
Yeah.
these books are both available on the website. You want, and we're going to provide a link to that.
Yes.
But you also have another really important event coming up in December that's connected to Christmas. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So again, how did I get into this? I wrote to somebody through the Patriot Mail Project. That's Patriot Mail Project, all one word, .com. And this is where we keep track of the prisoners. Again, this was a holdover from the Bundys in the Oregon standoffs with Bureau of Land Management. It was created to form a link between patriots in the free world and those who were being imprisoned for their political and anti-regime beliefs.
Right.
And that was reactivated for J6ers on July 4th of 2021. And so this becomes a vehicle for people to get involved. It's really simple. It costs you an envelope and a 60-cent stamp. And the letter you will get back, in all probability, will make it'll be a million times worth what you put into it, just in the
Right.
gratitude. I keep telling some of these folks who are my basic writers, who over and over again you'll see them in the book. They're the writer who writes to the person and gets the reply back. It says, like, if gratitude was currency, they would be millionaires, because the gratitude of somebody who is locked behind bars, who feels they are forgotten, to receive a letter of support, to know that somebody knows they're there, that somebody knows why they're there, that somebody believes and supports in the cause, it means the world to them. It
Mhm.
sustains them. It's
Yeah.
why we created the project. And this bleeds into the families too, because we take care of the families this way. When you go to patriotmailproject.com, you can search by state, by name, however you want to look for somebody to become a pen pal to. An
Mhm.
angel is a better word for it, but their
Yeah.
family is behind them. When you support them, their family receives this benefit of knowledge that more than this, them are worried about their loved one. And
Yeah.
and through this project, we also, through the book, obviously, the proceeds of the book go to take care of the families, get the prisoners to trials, try and take care of them when they come out. But
Yeah.
through the Patriot Mail Project, this is our third annual Christmas project for the families of J6 prisoners.
Mhm.
Many of these people are penniless now. They've
Yeah.
lost, they've, okay, this is horrific. Veterans who are not even convicted have had their VA benefits and their base privileges revoked. Men who have been convicted, who have paid into the FISA system their entire life, have had their Social Security benefits to them and their wives and widows cut
Mhm.
off.
Mm.
This is an attempt to drive these people into penury.
Yeah.
And so they need the help, and so that's where this money goes to. But the children, more than anything, are victims here.
Right.
They're left without a parent, in some cases without the parent. I've got a single mom who's going away now. We're trying to find people to take care of her 8 children. 8 children.
Wow.
8 children. And you're sending this woman to prison for protesting with a hat and a
Mm.
sign. And
Well,
so this is
yeah.
where this Christmas project comes in, right? You can help. You can be an angel to these children and these families in need this Christmas, to lighten the sorrow and the burden that they feel from this persecution. And I swear to you, it will make you feel like $1 million.
Yeah. Well,
So
God
go.
bless you for spreading salt and light. You know, as you were talking, it reminded me of a verse from the New Testament, Matthew 5, verse 14. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. So yeah, people listening in, please get involved with this Christmas project. You bring so much hope and light to people who are really suffering and who really need to hear from you and need your support.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. So that's our reading list, which we normally finish off with. Of course, your first book is featured, and the second one. People can look forward to that. The other book that I had mentioned, and I've talked about a little bit on the show, is the Gulag Archipelago. This is
Oh yeah.
a book that's been around for a long time. It's in many different editions. I warn people, it's in 3 volumes, and some of it is pretty dense reading. But essentially, this won a Nobel Prize from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It's considered a towering masterpiece of world literature. It's a searing record of 4 decades of terror and oppression in one abridged volume authorized by the author. And essentially what he does is he, drawing on his own experience before, during, and after his 11 years of incarceration and exile, on evidence provided by more than 200 fellow prisoners and on Soviet archives, Solzhenitsyn reveals with torrential narrative and dramatic power the entire apparatus of Soviet repression, the state within the state, that once ruled all powerfully, with a creation by Lenin in 1918. And as our guest has been talking about, the people who are trying to make a god of the state, the globalists who are at work influencing what's happening in countries like the United States and Canada and Britain and elsewhere. This is their goal. They want to create a society like this where they can imprison people arbitrarily, deny them civil liberties, to suppress their individuality, to deny them their right to exercise their religious beliefs and to practice their religion, the destruction of families. This was all part of the agenda that Tim Rivers and the January 6th group that he's involved in are trying to fight, and they're helping the people who are being suppressed by governments. And it's very important that we support organizations like Tim's, because it's not just unique to the United States. It's happening in Canada and elsewhere. And it's also really important, I think everybody who's listening to my voice understands this. If the US falls, we're all in deep trouble. Everybody realizes that the United States is, Dennis Prager called it the last great hope for civilization, and so we really all have a vested interest, an important interest, in helping these people who have been jailed under January 6th tyranny. So throw it over to you, Tim, for the final word. We want to thank you so much for being our guest here. Are there any other books or materials or websites that you would refer people to so they can learn more about what the work that you're doing, and perhaps just generally about the topics that you've been sharing with us today?
You heard a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? I urge you
Yes.
to go to Stop Hate. That's easy, right? StopHate.com. Look at the documentaries that are there. One is called Bloody Hill, the other one's called Writing History. And once you watch those videos, I think a lot of things will become clear. There's another one coming out that's called J6, The Real Timeline. It'll come out in December, about the same time as our second book, Art of Confinement. And it is an amazing timeline that shows you exactly what happened from start to finish that day, from when they were all the way down by the White House, all the way through the end of the violence that occurred at the Capitol. And you'll see exactly what happened that day. I just watched Police State by, I don't normally pitch other people's stuff, but I just
Yes.
watched Police State by Dinesh D'Souza. And
Yes.
folks, you
Yeah.
got to watch that one. That one is 100% accurate to the bone.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly what happened to these people, how they were taken down. And he exposes the underbelly of the deep state that is trying to fundamentally change our country into something that is unrecognizable to many of us. So I think those are very important films and documentaries. I could go on and on about books because I'm an avid reader, but I do think that seeing it for yourself, especially going to Stop Hate and watching these documentaries, seeing
Yeah.
the evidence for yourself, will help you understand better that day and make up your own mind. Don't listen to the Murdoch mogul and all their different outlets of lies. We are living a history of lies now.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to see truth for yourself.
Well, thank you for that, Tim, and thank you for those suggestions. Really, and we're really so grateful for the book and for all the work that you're doing. God bless you, and the work that everyone in your organization is doing to help these people, and really on behalf of everyone who loves freedom, and especially those of us who are Christians. It is truly inspiring to see the work that you're doing. We all know why you're doing it, and your heart is as big as the state of Florida for doing this. And thank you so much for being on our program and sharing all of this really vital information with us. It's been a great learning experience. I'm sure everyone who's spent this hour with us has really learned a great deal about what's really going on in the deep state, as you put it, and the globalist agenda that those of us who care about freedom and really love and our fellow man are all very, very interested in preserving and promoting. So thank you so much for being our special guest today on Grey Matter. It's been our absolute pleasure to host you today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me on. And remember, folks, don't do nothing.
Great advice.